Welcome to Dusty Little Wastelanders, written by L.L. Smith, narrated by L.L. Smith. Chapter 17, HillVille's Goodbye. My fingers gripped the knob, its surface as cold as my heart. The events of a couple hours had soiled our entire victory. My hands never wanted to open this door again. It led to my greatest achievement, a reunion I'd grown to doubt. I hadn't the time for further pondering. I turned the knob and shoved the door. The space had changed from how I remembered it. The wooden poles had been removed, and short stumps remained in the wake of those stuck pillars. Most had been removed from the ground, while the more stubborn ones had just been sawed down. The blood-stained dirt ground hadn't changed. A sprinkling of hay still lay upon the ground, as though its presence could provide comfort. Richard McDougal sat more toward the back of the room. He rested on an empty pail, an old rustic thing. It was a major step down from his ruby-laced librarian throne. His red suit was wrinkled and dusted. His rustled hair seemed grayer than my memory served. He sat on a pail about halfway through a novel. He didn't peer up from it. We waltzed in with no sense of secrecy, and rather than greet us or even check to see who his visitors were, he just kept on reading. He seemed at peace. That wasn't fair. After all the anguish he'd thrusted our way, thrusted every way for that matter, he'd lost so much. Why wasn't he miserable? I drew my firing pistol and closed in. "Answer my questions, McDougal." McDougal closed his book and met my eyes. His were worn. For the first time since my arrival in HillVille, Richard McDougal's face showed his age. "Put that down." Richard dismissed me with a wave. "Kyle will attest to the fact that I am quite the fan of healthy conversation." I pocketed my firing pistol and Mr. McDougal stood to face me. "A government agent claims that TM is Timothy Mowers, Jr. What do you know of the high officer and his missing children? Why does he participate in your auctions?" I grilled into him. "I can only answer a single question at a time," Mr. McDougal began his explanation. "I'd like to clarify that Timothy Mowers and I are associates only in business. He turned a blind eye to slave labor, and I brought him what orphans I collected. In truth, my men only participated in a marginal amount of abductions," Mr. McDougal continued. "Just enough to keep Timothy off my back. The larger chunk of abductions came from Timothy's direct influence." "Why is Timothy so fixated on orphans?" Kyle asked. "In due time, Kyle," Mr. McDougal waved. "You must seek the entire truth to achieve a clear vision. I can't explicitly state why Timothy Mowers obsessed over orphans. That's a truth you must experience firsthand. But the truth behind your TM is something I could clarify. When Timothy first came to power, his son was stolen. That's when he issued the search," I asked. "Precisely," Mr. McDougal confirmed. "But that search yielded only a body." Mr. McDougal passed glances between us. "Less than a year later, Timothy approached me about the first abduction." "You've been abducting children that long?" I asked. "Not I," McDougal insisted. "The auctions began as a way to filter children over to the high officer. But all the orphans rejected Timothy, or at least that's what I've been told. It was about 6 years ago when we finally found the one, the first orphaned infant. Timothy was overjoyed. He even altered his appearance to match the child's. Move forward 3 years, and that child was stolen as well, smuggled down to Moontown, where I believe you can fill in the rest." "Has he always been mute?" Kyle asked. "Can't say," McDougal shrugged. "I hadn't seen Junior since he was an infant. If I were on the bad side of the government, what would be your suggested course of action?" It hurt my mouth to ask this, but I aimed to keep things moving. "I killed a government agent," Kyle confessed. "Oh," McDougal smirked. "So you finally took my advice on protecting oneself." "I was protecting my family more than myself," Kyle announced. His announcement choked me up. I hadn't seen it that way. "Well, lucky for you, the Wastelands government is a relatively recent development. It didn't exist until Timothy came to power. It's a backstabbing environment where no friendships form. I'd suggest you use Junior as bait to get a meeting with Timothy. Timothy is an idiot with an ego of a salesman. Play into his ego and he'll sing like a bird. And then kill him." "You're insane," I announced. "That'd only stand to benefit you and ruin us." "Remember the full picture, son," Richard explained. "I'm not your son." I about reached for my pistol again. "Timothy's orphan obsession hasn't gone unnoticed. Take him out and leave as quickly as you arrived. The other government officials will be all too busy fighting to take his place to even bother with revenge." "That's too risky," I demanded. "You asked my advice, and I gave it." Mr. McDougal sat back on his pail. "Alternatively, you could live on the run, constantly hiding from Timothy's agents and other crazed citizens." I knew he had a point, and it disgusted me. There had to be another way to remedy this. I didn't want more blood on our hands. Killing a government agent was a huge endangerment. Assassinating the high officer? That was a direct action of rebellion. I didn't want to start a rebellion, just be left alone. Was that even a realistic goal at this point, with everything that had happened? Would we ever be left alone? Probably not. My thoughts were jolted by a deep series of coughs. I turned my attention to the source. Mr. McDougal was coughing up a lung. He reached into his coat pocket and retrieved a bloody handkerchief. He coughed more blood into it, it flooded into the handkerchief, and he packed it back into his coat pocket afterwards. "You're dying?" Kyle asked. We knew the signs. "Yes," Mr. McDougal nodded. 52 is much too old for a person in this world, and it's finally caught up to me. Damn dust consumption. "That's why you've been so cooperative," I accused. "It doesn't matter to you what becomes of the wastelands past this point." "That is only an accusation," McDougal announced. "These past days have provided clarity, a clear vision of how my lust for riches paved a life of misery that I'd existed to avoid. A life of misery not experienced by myself, but by those I affected. My existence had become a plague only serving to benefit number one. Thank you both for steering me to that conclusion. I spent my youth as a farmhand, living in environments much worse than this, but similar enough to serve as a reminder. I dedicated my life to avoiding that lifestyle, and in turn condemned others to it. I actually convinced myself that I was better than the plantation owners who'd once ruled my life. A self-defense mechanism. We didn't come here for your history lesson," I growled. "I'm sorry," Kyle said, "but I'm happy you found peace. I know you needed it." Mr. McDougal broke into another fit of coughs. I was jealous. Why did dust consumption get the glory of killing this man? I could shoot him just as easily now, but that would ruin me. There's no satisfaction gained from putting down a sickly mutt. "Your forgiveness is the most precious of them all, young Kyle." Mr. McDougal bowed his head and looked at me. He saw forgiveness wasn't in the forecast of my eyes. I turned my attention back to my posse. It was time we leave. We'd spent too long with Richard McDougal. Although he had provided some needed clarification, the others looked to me with mixed emotions. None of us knew what was coming next, but it was time we decided. The decisions weighed heavy on my mind. In the past, these decisions would have been mine to make, and mine alone. The rest of the posse would have followed those directions with determination. But there were too many others to be affected by these plans. They required a collaborative effort. So, I started looking into my acquired family. Which will it be? Assassinating the high officer or a life hiding on the run? My wondering made one choice stick out above the other. I hoped that didn't hinder their judgment. "Edward ratted on us," Kyle claimed with a fist. "Where would we hide?" "The wasteland is a pretty small pocket of desert," I said. "And word travels real fast in major shanty towns," K2 added. "Which leaves places like Stonetooth as the only safe places to stay," Kyle said. We waited a minute, pondering over the idea of going back to Stonetooth, or seeing it for the first time for a few of us. We'd built ourselves up so much better than that ragged, dust-blown pile of tin. Doubt there is much work to be had there either. "I want to do this," Kyle announced. We stared back at Kyle, wondering just what this was. "I want to take control of our lives. I don't want to run and hide. Let's show the high officer's odd habit." It's new Kyle. But his suggestion did hold some temptation. TM nodded to that. I took it to be an agreement. "It's a group decision," I clarified. "Is this really what we want?" "I don't like the idea of more killing," K2 confessed. "But life on the run and hiding is no life. The high officer has been due his comeuppance." "Yes or no?" I asked. "Yes," new Kyle jumped in. TM kept on his nodding. I wondered just how personal things were between TM and the high officer. "Okay," K2 was the last to concede. It had been decided. I peered over my shoulder to get a lasting glance at Mr. McDougal's mug. His eyes were back to his novel, his lips curled into a devil's grin. What kind of skin did he have in this game? He hadn't made a suggestion purely for our benefit. I should have expected as much from a snake like him. He always is weaving plans. I didn't dwell on it. Regardless of his needs, this plan did meet ours. "All right," I announced. "We'll need to escape to the right of this property. There will be officers waiting for us in the back by TJ's, and we'll run right into the law station if we move forward. That leaves the sides as our only exit." "May I suggest you exit to the left of my property?" Mr. McDougal added his input. "My private port is out that way. It'd be your quickest and most discreet way back onto the wastelands." "Thank you, Richard," Kyle said. I couldn't bring myself to thank that snake, but I did appreciate his input. "What about Donald?" Kyle spoke up. "We can't just leave without at least telling him." I didn't want to risk any more exposure, but Kyle was right. After all Donald had been through trying to save Kyle, it would be wrong to just bolt out without a word. But Monica's house was in the middle of town. I'd be advertising my Hey there, what's up? LL Smith here. Thank you so much for enjoying my audiobook. I'm going to interrupt you real quick and say, if you get real anxious to hear what happens next and just can't wait till next week, or if you get the urge to just support such a stunning, ruggedly handsome, and awesome independent creator such as myself, I encourage you highly to go follow the link in the description and support the official release. Thank you so much for listening, and let's jump right back into that story. To show up there. The wastelands provided a few more opportunities to maintain my dignity, and this was one of them. Realistically thinking, HillVille only had 2 law officers, armed with clubs no less. If I were forced into it, I could allow my pistol to do its worst. We were about to assassinate the high officer. What were 2 more bodies on my conscience? I hated that that's where my thought process had led, but that's my lot in life. Alright, I started. TM, K2, and Kyle head for the private port. I'll meet up with Donald and either bring him or just myself to meet you at the other end of the private port. Got it? Yes, K2 answered. That plan puts you in incredible danger, Kyle announced. Donald's done the same in our efforts to get you back, I said. I owe him this much. I can accompany you if you don't mind, Mr. McDougal offered. I may still have some pull with the law officers. I snarled at Mr. McDougal for a moment. I'd never wanted his help. I clearly didn't want any more than I'd already asked for. But in this situation, I needed his help. And I had to put my needs over my petty wants and desires. Alright, thanks, I choked out. That was it. The plans had been formed and time to act had passed several minutes ago. We left the slave quarters together and I watched my posse run off to the left. I watched them until I could see them no more. Given everything that had happened, I expected the streets to be crawling with attention. The nighttime brought its familiar silence, a silence that was too eerie now. We traveled through the moonlit town. Monica's house was something I'd committed to memory. She lived several steps from McDougal's manor, but there was no long walks in HillVille. It was concentrated enough to give you everything you needed with a sense of immediacy. Monica's shambled shanty was blurring back into view, the dusty sheets of blue still scattered on the floor. Donald was slaving away at the same wall from this morning. Monica watched over him, not looking too entirely happy. She spotted me before Donald did. Donald was too engrossed in his failed repairs to notice much of anything else. Hey Donald, I called out. What's up? Donald responded, still hammering the shanty wall back into shape. You got a moment? I asked. Yeah. Donald put down his hammer and turned to face me. His face was red from excessive sun exposure, and his expression was sunken, void of happiness. He was too distracted to notice that I came in the company of Richard McDougal. Is everything okay? I blurted out, my mission derailed. My concerns had veered far away from Donald these recent days. His void expression told me he was in need of something. Yeah, Donald unconvincingly confessed. I'm just tired from all this work is all, but I'm almost done with this wall. And when you're done with that wall, you've still got 3 more to go, Monica demanded from afar. I glanced between Monica's demands and Donald's expression. I think you need a break, bud. When was the last time you ate or drank something? I think you need to mind your own, Monica interrupted. Donald is one of my own, I declared. Now what the hell is going on here? I'm just helping her to rebuild her house is all, Enry. Donald's words were either aiming to comfort me or himself. I couldn't differentiate which. You've never been very handy, and now you're trying to rebuild an entire shanty? I couldn't believe that I'd never questioned this before. You wouldn't get it, Enry, but she loves me. She really loves me, Donald confessed. This isn't love, I declared. This is borderline slave labor. Everything is about slave labor with you, Monica insulted. He said it. We're in love and happy together. If you were a real friend, you'd help him. I'm ashamed to admit this, but I finally am helping him, I announced. I turned to Donald. There's no secret that you have a problem with women. She's using that problem to her advantage, Donald. This isn't love. But she tells me every night that she loves me, Enry, Donald confessed. And the sex. Oh my God. I waved that thought out of my head. Love is more than words, sex, and labor, Donald. One day you'll understand, Enry, Donald claimed. Oh no, I think I understand today, I defended. We're leaving. What? Why? Something's come up, I said. Kyle's leaving too? Donald asked. Don't hide behind dumb questions, I declared. We're leaving now. Come with us. I can find plenty of women in the next brothel willing to confess their love to you. Monica's no different. How dare you compare me to such filth? Monica pulled a knife and came at me. I pulled my firing pistol. Monica dropped her knife in an instant and stumbled back. We have to go, I urged. Donna looked over to Monica. She stood still, revealed to the world and still clinging to the labor. I love you, Donnie. Those 3 words were the only hold she had over Donald. He looked back to me. I remained stern. Donald had been wrecked. With me being so wrapped up in Kyle and him being so distant, I couldn't blame myself for allowing this to happen. But my mind took full guilt. Now I had to stand here and plead with Donald, who was a shell of himself, because this had been allowed to get so far. I didn't have the proper time to explain things to him neither. What would I do if Donald opted to stay? Would I let him? Could I force him to join us? Okay, let's go. Donald sulked. I sighed. Help me, help! He has a gun! Monica shrieked. He has a gun! I didn't need any more attention. Monica was determined to be the winner of this exchange. Get out of here, I'll stall them, Richard instructed. I'd grabbed Donald's hand and pulled him towards McDougal's manor. Was that Richard McDougal? Donald finally realized. You've missed a lot, I said, but we've got to get out of here. I'll fill you in once we're in the wastelands. I looked over my shoulder before crossing onto McDougal's plantation. I could see Richard McDougal speaking with an officer. They were quick on the scene. They must have been on high alert thanks to Edward. Donald and I crossed into the manor, and I kept us moving along. We passed by the rubble and through the messed up greenery. Our legs hopped through the crumbled gate and on the left side of the property. There was more greenery on the other side, but there was a clear path. We followed it. Within seconds, we found the port. It was a sort of break in HillVille's border that opened right up into the wastelands. The gate's doors remained open, either from the people before us or general neglect. We rushed through the gates and about smashed into the rest of our posse. "Donald!" Kyle cried out. Donald squeezed him in an immediate hug. Kyle was thrown off. He eventually engaged in the hug, sensing that Donald needed it. I looked through our numbers, doing roll in my head. We were all there. K2, TM, Kyle, Donald, and I. Our full posse. We all missed Esther, but I'd always known he wouldn't be joining us past HillVille. I just wish I had a proper chance to thank him. End of Chapter 17.